Okay, so we just discussed the particular type of money that we have in our economy, which is fiat money, which gets its name and its purchasing power via government fiat or law declaration. So we talked about different types of money, commodity monies and commodity-backed paper money. And what's an important requirement of fiat money is that, and this is true of different types of money, is that it has limited supply. That's really important. And so that is accomplished because the government is the authority that can print off the fiat money and give it its value. So the government, in effect, or the central bank, as we'll see, controls to some degree that supply of money. There's a limited amount of paper dollars out there and coins, and so that's what helps it retain its value. If we chose something else that had much less limited supply, that would make it much more difficult to enforce. So if it was just pieces of paper with no markings on them, that would make it much less valuable and function as money. So what about other items? So, there was actually, so I say playing cards. So there was, if you look up the history of New France, which is more or less today what is Quebec in Canada. It also included parts of the upper eastern part of the United States and Vermont and Maine, but for the most part was Quebec. I look back at the history of New France when it was sort of a colony, still owned in effect by France. They used to get shipments of coins that they used to pay their soldiers from France. So they would ship big loads of coins over to New France, and they would use those coins as commodity money, basically. Well, at some point, the shipments became less and less frequent, and they still had to pay their soldiers. And so what they did was they issued effectively IOUs on playing cards. They took a playing card and they flipped it over and they said, this card is worth this amount of money. Once the money arrives, you can bring me the playing card and turn it in. And so the playing cards circulated around as effectively commodity-backed money. So why don't those types of things work? So, what was the problem, or what is a problem of using a playing card, is that it's easy to counterfeit, right? So it's easy to replicate or duplicate, which leads itself to counterfeit. And so it's really important that I be able to get a $20 bill and trust that it's authentic. I can turn it around and use it again. And counterfeiting sort of undoes that value of money, undoes the fiat in a sense. So other types of items that are easy to counterfeit don't make good use as fiat money, which is why the government spends a lot of effort making sure that the money is not able to be counterfeited. It has special markings that indicate it has not been duplicated. Okay, so some other types of current events. So you may have heard of Bitcoin, which is another potential type of money. So what is it? Well, it's cryptocurrency. Which means it's basically what you get is like a computer code that is, it's stored on what's called a blockchain, and it has to be obtained in a particular way. And you get this unique code that says I own 1 Bitcoin. And I can exchange that Bitcoin for goods and services with merchants who accept them. So in that sense, Bitcoin definitely functions potentially as one type of money. So it is money as traditionally defined, right? I can use it as a medium of exchange. Certain merchants will accept a Bitcoin in exchange for goods and services. It's a store of value. I can hold on to my Bitcoin over time and use it to buy goods and services in the future. And it's a unit of account. If you go online in certain merchants, it will list the price of goods and services in terms of Bitcoin. So it definitely satisfies money. It is not fiat money. And I use this example to help us understand what is fiat money, right? So, the Bitcoin itself is, in fact, intrinsically useless, right? So all you have is a computer code. and that's it. And you can't use that for anything else. So it is useless intrinsically. Right? So you would say, well, it's definitely not a commodity money because there's nothing of value there. So it's intrinsically useless, but it's not given any purchasing authority by the government. Right? It's valued in the marketplace the way other goods and services are valued. So it's not fiat money because the government hasn't said this is an acceptable form of Bitcoin. If I'm a merchant and you show up with Bitcoin, I don't have to accept the Bitcoin if I don't want to. That's different than a fiat money. Okay, so that's kind of some basics of Bitcoin, right? And so, a few interesting things. Criminals like it, like Bitcoin, because it's anonymous. So when I exchange Bitcoin for something, nobody knows who the owner of the Bitcoin is, except for that person. And so that makes it easy if I'm engaged in criminal activity to buy and sell things illegally without having any record of it. Also makes it potentially valuable for laundering money and doing other nefarious activities. So that's one disadvantage of Bitcoin, is it encourages in some sense this type of activity. In fact, criminals also like to transact in cash because that doesn't have a paper trail typically. If I buy and sell in cash, there's no record that I've bought and sold these things. So criminals like it. The other thing, we think about the store of value, is that the value of Bitcoin fluctuates a lot. So I've got a little graph here that shows, since it started, the value of Bitcoin in terms of US dollars. So when it started off, for one Bitcoin, you would get $13. If I held a Bitcoin, it was worth $13 in terms of goods and services. As it gained popularity here, you see it maxed out close to $20,000 per Bitcoin, right? So imagine you had gotten one Bitcoin down here worth $13. All of a sudden, it's worth nearly $20,000. That's a pretty good rate of return, and your store of value there has been very good. Of course, as we can see since then, the value has fluctuated a lot, and so that makes it a little bit less valuable in terms of its function of money, right? So day to day, the value of my Bitcoin is going to change a lot, and so is the value of what I can purchase with my Bitcoin. And so fiat money, although it changes in value, it's very stable over time. So it tends to decrease in value over time as we have inflation. But at least I know roughly that it's going to be worth about what it was worth today 1 week from now. With Bitcoin, that doesn't tend to be the case. So at any rate, this was kind of an aside that I find interesting to think about these different forms of money, what they look like, and Bitcoin is a particularly interesting one that will be fun to watch how it evolves over the next several years.